Hey y'all, this is Sam with the Roots of Change podcast, and I am very excited to have Andres Chavez from the Chavez Foundation here with us today. How are you doing, Andres?
Good, Sam, and thanks for having us this morning. Look forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you on. It's kind of wild. We reached out right when the government shut down, and we are now having this conversation on the day of the world record or the country record of having the longest government shutdown. And so I would love to just kind of kick it off if you could just explain what the Chavez Foundation is and how it's related to the Cesar Chavez Monument, which is is it a national or a state monument?
It's a national monument, yeah. So, I think the Chavez Foundation, we were founded under a different name in 1966. When my tata Cesar, Dolores, and Larry Leong and other leaders were working to form what's now the United Farm Workers. I think what they had realized was that farm workers weren't just farm workers. They went home to a whole new set of issues outside the workplace, and so they began to build this, over the years, over decades, kind of this web of different nonprofits and other entities that were going to begin addressing those issues in the work outside of the workplace. And so over the years, kind of through different types of consolidation mergers, we now have what is currently the Cesar Chavez Foundation. And our work is really focused in four programmatic areas. The first and kind of our largest portion of work is we're affordable housing developers. We're one of the larger affordable housing developers in the Southwestern United States, with about 6,000 units in California, Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico. So really meeting a critical need and doing our part in that space. In addition to that, we have Chavez Media, which is a multimedia kind of a group that operates within the Chavez Foundation. Right now, primarily, we're really focused on kind of terrestrial broadcast radio, and this was something that was started back in the 1980s and has really transformed. Obviously, with changes in technology, we're doing a lot more of what we see here today. So, podcasting and other kind of digital content production, along with kind of live events, all with the effort of hoping to kind of educate and inspire the communities that we're communicating with over the airwaves or digitally. And then we have an education group. And at the Chavez Foundation, we really believe that education is the civil rights issue of our time. When we look at, the disparities, when we look at the achievement gaps that Latino students and students of color face compared to some of their peers, we thought that we needed to step up and play a role in that space. And so our education group works with school districts throughout the Southwestern United States, providing a variety of products and services that really look at shrinking those achievement gaps and making sure that we're preparing students who look like me to prepare them for the 21st century. And then you briefly mentioned the work of the National Chavez Center, which is the arm that I lead, and we're really focused around sharing Cesar's legacy and his values with the American public. We do so in a variety of different ways, one of which you mentioned, which is in partnership with the National Park Service. We have the Cesar Chavez National Monument. It's the 398th unit of the National Park Service. Annually, just outside about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I would say, northeast of Los Angeles, we have about 50,000 visitors join us where they can come and learn about Cesar and the farm worker movement, and also get to experience the grounds that he lived and worked on. And so that's one of the programs. We run educational and cultural programming. We have an archiving and exhibits function, some licensed intellectual property work. It's kind of a mixed bag under the auspice of the National Chavez Center. But when you put all that work together, you have the Cesar Chavez Foundation, which on a daily basis continues to work on behalf of Latinos, working families, and farm workers, really hoping to inspire and transform their communities.
Yeah, it's amazing. I really appreciate how you really focus on different key areas, and they're all different because I think, when we're talking about social change, a lot of times we'll focus on like the obvious kind of mechanisms like politics, but when we're trying to create larger, massive change, we do need all of those different kind of tiers. And I want to focus on, the the national monument and talk about the government shutdown. How is the government shutdown affecting the Chavez Foundation?
Yes, given our relationship with the National Park Service and kind of co-management of the Cesar Chavez National Monument, the monument is not open. It hasn't been open for the last, I guess, what is it, day 37 now or 39, I forget. But we haven't been open since then. And so, I guess the biggest impact there is that we have this important part of American history that's not being accessible to the American public. Accessibility is a key word when we really think about the work of the Chavez National Monument. When you look at the National Park Service, and don't quote me directly on this, but something in their mission really talks about them kind of telling the story of America's natural, historical, and cultural kind of assets. When you look at that, and you look at the different units of the National Park Service, I think it's upwards of 430 units of the National Park Service. I believe it's less than 5 of them actually speak to the modern day Latino experience in this country. This is post-Civil War. When we look at Latino communities, just population size, we see that there's a gap there, and that the current kind of makeup of National Parks Unit isn't really reflective of the country's population. So therefore, the existence of the Chavez National Monument and the Blackwell School in Marfa, Texas, they have outsized impact, especially when communicating Latinos' contributions to the fabric of this nation. And so I think that's the most devastating thing that we see is that with so many attempts from different parts of society right now, looking to erase Latino history, Latino culture, these monuments and their existence and their accessibility are extremely important. And so that's kind of the most immediate impact that we're seeing. Obviously, there's impact to the programming that we're running. We had big Dia de los Muertos celebrations celebrated. I actually had Dolores Huerta's daughter text me over the weekend and say, "Hey, Andres, are we doing? Is there a Dia de los Muertos celebration?" And I said, "No, we had to cancel because the government shut down." And she was like, "What a bummer." We had a planned naturalization ceremony. One of the programs that we run at the National Monument is we have naturalization ceremonies. It's an incredible ceremony where you have 30 to 40 folks from different parts of the world who came to this country in search of these principles that folks believe in, right? And they were, they had to reschedule their naturalization ceremony. And so many people actually intentionally choose wanting to do it here at the National Monument, and it's something that we really enjoy doing. That had to be postponed. And there's different programs that we do at schools. And though we're still able to kind of work on those through the nonprofit side, which is the side that I lead, there's not as much coordination with the federal government because there's nobody working. And so we're kind of at a standstill. And that would be, about 3,000 to 4,000 students that would be impacted by this work. And so there's real impacts as it relates to the National Monument, more largely at the Chavez Foundation. So many of the folks that we work with on a daily basis are directly impacted by this. In affordable housing, a lot of our folks live, at, near, or below the poverty line. And so when we're seeing cuts to kind of SNAP benefits, when we're seeing the potential rise on healthcare premiums, that directly impacts our communities firsthand. And so these are some of the immediate kind of pressures that our organization and the people that we work with on a daily basis are facing.
Yeah, it's really important to note the personal impacts as well, because I think we often miss that. When a lot of folks are making ends meet every single month, just barely, and we have to think about Donald Trump and the MAGA strategy is to defund us, not just our movements, but to defund us as people. I was very blessed to get to go to the Cesar Chavez monument in August, and I knew that this potentially could be a risk of it not being open in the future. And it's so heartbreaking to think about because it is such a beautiful place. It is, as a Latino, I got very emotional being there, having the Southwestern plants and the native vibe, the Spanish, the Mexican feel to everything. I can only imagine what the naturalization ceremony is like. And so, what it feels like to me is like this is an intentional strategy. The government shutdown is obviously doing a lot of different things, but one of those things is to silence our stories and our history. And I would love to just hear, like, what would you say, how would Caesar be approaching this right now? What would he say about the government shutdown?
In terms of how I think my thought that Caesar would respond to this government shutdown, I don't know how he might respond to kind of specifically the government shutdown, but what I can reflect on is just the fact that when you look at my thought that Caesar's work and you look at the work of the farm workers movement, there's a few things that are very obvious. And one of those things that have been very obvious is that they have constantly had to go up against really big, powerful forces working against the will of the people. Um, and what they've also had to deal with is the fact that they lost more times than they won. And what I've shared with people is that bad actors have come and gone throughout history. They've always come and gone. And what my thought that Caesar used to always say is that you only lose when you give up and when you stop fighting. And so I think if my thought that Caesar were around right now, and I think if he was seeing all the threats from the current administration, I think he would obviously be responding to the moment and doing what he needed and what he thought was what he thought made most sense to combat it head on. But I think he'd also be looking at the longer vision and the arc of justice, right? In the sense that, okay, we've been here before, and what we have to do as organizers, as folks working on behalf of La Causa, as folks working on behalf of people, is we have to get up and we have to continue to do our work in a steadfast manner every single day, day in and day out, and that's how we make change. And I think that's some of what I think makes these leaders from the past so incredible was just their resilience. It's nothing fancy. It's not sure they were great, strategists, and sure they had great tactics, but I think so much of what made them successful was just the fact that when they got knocked down, they would get back up. They would dust their shoulders off, and just day by day, they would chip away at the issues that they're working on behalf of and working in service of people. And so I think that's what his response would be. I think he'd be like, okay, hey, before Donald Trump, there was Ronald Reagan, and before Ronald Reagan in California, we had Dick Mason, and there was Nixon, and you could go down the list and name every single bad president, every single bad politician, every single evil person that's ever worked against our cause, and he'd say, hey, but we're still here, we're still doing the work, and that's our commitment that we've made, and we need to uphold that. And so that's why I think even though there's so much going on right now, I look back to that history and I use that as my source of faith right now to keep on persevering.
Yeah, love that. And I definitely am trying to channel Cesar in this moment as well, particularly around his kind of like joyful warrior presence. Like what I really relate most is just how personable he is. Like he was a man of the people, and a lot of the times we can be in these very peak moments where we're looking at the bad actors, and that's all we're talking about. With Cesar, he did such a good job of turning the focus back to our communities, back to the people, and how we can thrive through this type of chaos.
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate you recognizing that, because I think sometimes one of the things that we've been very mindful of recently as we're thinking about the ongoing legacy is I think for a period of time there was kind of you would want to prop up leaders, and I think that's why we have folks like Dr. King and Caesar and Larry Itliong and and Dolores and other folks, but there was always that was kind of the leadership style back in the day, in terms of like that's the way that people would prop people up. But what we know about my Tata Caesar's work, and though he was a very effective leader, it's like what I've heard and talked with people and where he excelled most was in just kind of one-on-one conversations, going back to those basic principles of organizing, where one conversation at a time can lead to so much. And by bringing people together, we can be extremely powerful, right? Like the stuff that we learned from Fred Ross Sr. and those principles. And so I appreciate you recognizing that, because I think that's part of the history, the legacy that we want to share with folks. And I think, to your point in terms of, I think, or I guess to answer your question a little bit around what, how he was able to kind of center around people is that, my thought that had the same shared experience as a lot of the folks that he was working with. He had experienced, the racism, the discrimination, the poverty of farm work, the injustice on a daily basis. But my thought that kind of coupled with that, he had this extraordinary faith in people. What he used to say is that my job as an organizer is to help ordinary people do extraordinary things. And he really had tremendous faith in folks. And he always thought that, given the opportunity and given a little bit of resources, people can do incredible things. And so when we really look at his work, sure, there was, union victories, and there was legislative and regulatory victories, and there was other types of victories. But I think so much of what his legacy is also built around was this fact that there was countless individuals that he either directly or indirectly kind of put into positions and kind of almost thrown into the deep end a little bit, right? But had so much faith in these people to go out there and in fact do that work. And I think it's just because it goes back to that idea of resilience, right? And just kind of this faith in people. And I think that's an underlying quality that he had. And I was sharing a story of he was on a national press tour. I forget what year, it was in the 80s, or I believe it was in the 70s or 80s. And the press, a press member of the press was following him for a few days. And as he was going from kind of campaign rally and march and kind of action to place, there was a lot of people who would come up and show a lot of kind of love and affection for him and the work that he was leading. And the reporter asked him, what accounts for all this love and affection that the farm workers are giving you? And he paused and he looked over at the reporter and said, the feeling is mutual. And that was the way that he responded to the question. And I think that really kind of encompasses, my thought, the Cesar spirit.
Yeah. I love that. And that brings it back to that kind of great leader mentality versus people power. And, he was obviously a leader, and he would deflect from that because he understood that the power wasn't within him. It was within his ability and all of our ability to connect and to organize. And I feel like I want to turn it to media and storytelling, because that's what the Roots of Change Agency is all about, is like, how do we tell our stories? How do we break from this grip of white supremacist storytelling? And I think, having the monument closed right now is a big blow to the stories that we can tell about Latinos. And we're also seeing a large purge in the media across broadcast, TV. Recently, Teen Vogue just fired all of their staff and moved them into Vogue. And so there are no Black or brown or queer folks working at Vogue, which used to be a very political heavy, progressive paper. And we're seeing that across the board. And so I wanted to talk first about like the Chavez media, as well as just the importance of telling our stories, building our power through storytelling.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned that. I wasn't aware of what was taking place at Teen Vogue and Vogue. It's a little upsetting because it's almost like the same exact battles that we were fighting, decades ago are starting to resurface again. And the reason why I say that is because, Chavez media, the idea for what today's Chavez media actually came about in 1962. On March 31st, 1962, my dad is 35 years old, has a family of 8. He's working for the Community Service Organization, which at the time was the most active Latino civil rights organization on the West Coast. They were doing a lot of work with Fred Ross and others, organizing voter registration campaigns, advocating for curb gutter sidewalk. And, he was doing pretty well. He had become state director of this organization, but he always remembered his experience as a farm worker. And he tried to get the organization to agree to begin organizing farm workers. And they had seen that there had been a lot of successes, there had been a lot of failures there, and the probability of success wasn't great, and they didn't think it was the right direction. And so he decided to leave, giving up, the most comfortable employment, a job that he was highly successful at, to go back and, pretty much go into self-imposed poverty for this vision and this dream that he had. And so, he begins organizing, and they found this group called the NFWA, the National Farm Workers Association. And that organization was founded in 1966, and they had their first kind of constitutional convention in Fresno, California. I believe it was in September of 1962. And there they had some, I believe, about 300 farm worker delegates. These were individuals who were dues-paying members to this association. It wasn't a union at this point, right? But people that believed in the transformation of their communities and of their livelihoods. And they kind of, in that convention, they adopted a set of demands, and again, a kind of a wish list, if you will. And in it, there was stuff about educational opportunities for their kids, increase the minimum wage for farm workers. There was a litany of things, but one of the things that stood out was the farm workers wanted to have a 1 day a week, 30-minute radio segment to talk about farm working issues. They wanted to take control of their own narrative, and they wanted to get information about what was directly affecting them. Really thinking about this kind of narrative change and wanting to drive that. What that idea developed into was first a set of radio stations being built that now communicate with about 500,000 people on a daily basis. And now with changes in technology and demographic shifts, us really thinking hard about how is it that we can continue with this mission and this wish from 1962 to continue to communicate with the communities that we want to serve, right? And so part of what we're dealing with there, not to get terribly tactical, but is this demographic shift, which is that when you look at the Latino population these days, there's a lot more English-speaking Latinos in this country. We had historically been a Spanish radio broadcaster. And the second thing has been the technological shift. But what hasn't shifted is this idea that you're talking about, us being able to communicate our own stories, tell the stories of our community, inform our community. And so at the Chavez Media, they're doing that in a variety of ways. There's a lot of experimentation happening right now, really trying to figure out, what is the best way that we can provide quality content for audiences, but also try to make it sustainable so that we can continue this message for another 50, 60 years. Through the radio program, there's still incredible content that really blends together entertainment and education, so that we can bring in large audiences through the kind of entertainment lens, if you will. But once you have a large audience, now you have them hooked and captivated, then you can tell them, hey, go vote on Prop 50, make sure to go get vaccinated. This is what's taking place. And so that's been the strategy there. And we're transforming that into the digital space. Obviously, a lot more kind of micro targeted content, hitting certain populations and groups that we're wishing to speak with. Still trying to use elements of entertainment, because we know that people, after a long, hard day work, do they really want to go home and listen to everything that's like wrong with the world, or do they want to be able to maybe have a little bit of entertainment and then also get some useful information? And so there's a variety of different products. One of them being really cool, called Historias de Si Se Puede, where we share kind of personal success stories of individuals, mostly from immigrant backgrounds, who've come to this country and who have been able to become successful in whatever field they're working in, whether it's organizing, business, law, healthcare, really highlighting those stories and showing that advancement is possible, in sharing their experiences. And that's a program that I really like. And then in addition to that, just always running a lot of different kind of campaigns, running campaigns like the Yo Aquí Cuento campaign, which was designed to help increase voter turnout and voter engagement. But during the census, also trying to encourage people to participate in the census. A really interesting thing that we did is during the summer of 2020, and we had the murder of George Floyd. Spanish media has historically been very anti-Black, and we thought that as a Spanish kind of media producer, that we had an obligation to try to combat some of this anti-Blackness that we're seeing in the media. And we took the issue head on, and we talked to folks about what we should talk about. And it was a really interesting learning lesson for me. I remember talking with this guy named Phil Brown, whose father was a veteran of the Selma voting rights movement, and was one of the organizers there. And I called Phil and I said, Phil, we're looking to really address some of this anti-Blackness in Spanish media within the Latino community. And, let's begin talking about the school to prison pipeline. Let's begin talking about police brutality. And I began listening on the issues. And, Phil listened to me patiently, and then he stopped and said, Andres, that's all good. We can talk about that. But what's going to be more effective is if we talk about our humanity, the shared humanity that we share. Black mothers and Latina mothers want the same for their children. That we all want, equal opportunity and access to whether it be healthcare opportunities or jobs. And he goes, let's talk about that shared humanity and the shared struggles that we have. And that's the way that we can bridge these communities together. And that was so insightful, right? It was incredible. And so we began to do that and also jump into some of the issues. And, some of the listeners decided to turn away from us. But that was okay. That was a risk that we were willing to take because that's the type of media organization that we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that anecdote. I think that's so important. Especially knowing that like our media has always been very controlled by elites, but we're seeing that even more so with like Jeff Bezos owning the Washington Post and all of these other billionaires controlling the narrative. And a lot of that narrative is a divide and conquer strategy. And so it's really great to hear that there's like intentionality behind bridging those divides. And I think the example that I think about is I Love Lucy episode where um, Lucy gives birth, and Ricky Ricardo is in the waiting room, and there's a whole scene where there is a monkey, and it is very clearly uh, related to like minstrelsy and racism. And that was very disappointing to me because I can only imagine my grandparents watching I Love Lucy and being so excited to see that Latino representation, and then that be coupled with more racism. Uh, that's something that we can be more aware of now and really push that narrative back so that we can see those connective tissues.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I think what gives me a little bit of hope is that to have to be in media in serious ways back in the day, there was a lot of barriers to entry. For example, when you had newspapers, you had to have the means to run a newspaper. And as TV was established and radio use, these are still very expensive kind of ways to communicate to people. But I think now through their kind of digital media, social media, there's a lot less kind of barrier to entry. And we're seeing a lot of different types of information. So that gives me a little bit of faith that if we get enough good people kind of sharing their stories and kind of highlighting their experiences through various forms of content, whether it be highly produced or whether it be somebody just kind of picking up their phone and sharing what it's like in their community, I think that's all helpful to kind of combating some of these narratives. I think what the trick is going to be with the integration of AI and kind of its ability to kind of create just information is how is it that we're balancing that too, because we're also going to find ourselves in another situation where you have the architects of AI really being so powerful in terms of their ability to control information, right? So it's almost like there was a democratization. The kind of information was democratized a little bit through the power of the internet, through the power of social media, and folks' ability to create content because you create a low barrier of entry. But now we're dealing with this kind of next wave of what does it look like when information is being so kind of closely held by a few big platforms or companies, and that's going to be the next uphill battle. But I think that's why all of us get up and go to work every single day and try to have these conversations and be mindful and really strategic about what is it that we're going to do to respond to make sure that we can continue to communicate with the folks that we want to talk with.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioning AI because is like a global narrative, like attempt to control the global narrative. It's an attempt to rewrite history in certain times, and really make sure that supremacy maintains its power. And to me, again, that goes back to stories. It goes back to our ability to see ourselves in leadership, see ourselves creating change, see ourselves in the future. Right now, it can be very hard to imagine the future. And so I'm really grateful that we got to talk today. As we start wrapping up, I would love to just hear how are you supporting Latino families right now? And for those that are looking for support, where can they find that with the Chavez Foundation?
Yeah, at the Chavez Foundation, through the different programs that we run, we're using that to support Latino families and working families throughout the country. through our housing, obviously, continue to provide clean, quality, affordable housing for folks. But when we have residents, we also know that there's different services that they need. And so right now, I know that our community service kind of staff folks who work at the apartment complexes are actively working with kind of food pantries and food banks to make sure that some of our most vulnerable populations and residents have access to the food that they need so they can continue to feed themselves and their families. With so much happening around kind of immigration and ICE raids right now, we've also taken very deliberate attempts at making sure that we kind of distinguish what is public and private property, and making sure that we're clear about that and signage so that we can protect our residents and other folks. There's a big Know Your Rights effort happening, through our airwaves, but also kind of on the ground level, person by person with different apartment complexes. And that's just to name a few. And then also, I think right now, what's extremely important for all organizations to think about is that kind of in times of peril, in times of distress like this, it's important that all of us come together and band together and rise to meet the moment. And so we've tried to become very, very intentional about what does partnership truly look like, and maybe going a little bit outside the bounds of our work and maybe outside of our traditional job scopes, but to sit there and support our brothers and sisters in the fight alongside of us. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing right now. And so we within the farm worker movement, being a web of organizations, have been very intentional about what is it that we can do to share information, to share resources, to really empower each other and support each other during this time so we can really be effective in meeting the needs of our community. And so if you want to continue to get involved and kind of just follow our progress in what it is that we're doing, the best way to kind of do it and kind of the most accessible way, if you will, would be through our social media channels. I'd encourage you to, on Instagram, there's UFW updates if you're curious about what's happening in the fields. There's the Chavez Foundation on Instagram, and then if you go to Facebook and other places, you just type in UFW United Farm Workers or Cesar Chavez Foundation, you can find it. And then there you'll get a link to all the other organizations that operate within the farm worker movement. We have Lupe down in South Texas, working along the border, doing incredible work there, community organizing. If you're down in Texas or curious about what's happening there in the Rio Grande Valley, Lupe, La Unión de Pueblo Entero, is an incredible organization. And then we have the UFW Foundation, which is really meeting the moment right now on the immigration front and doing a lot of work around deportation defense. And you can find them at UFW Foundation and the social media platforms.
Amazing. Yeah. And we're sure to share all of this in the show notes so that people can access that right away. I'm so glad that we got to chat. I know we scheduled this maybe 2 weeks out, and it felt to me like very far away. And we're still here with the government shutdown. So I cannot thank you enough for the work that the Chavez Foundation is doing for Latino communities, immigrant communities, and just everyone in this moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate the conversation. Yeah, just really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Everything happens in right timing. So this was perfect. And I hope to continue that dialogue with you.
Thank you.
And in the meantime, I hope everyone stays rooted.